The dining room at Dad's house had never felt smaller than it did that Thanksgiving afternoon, with 14 family members gathered around the mahogany table that had witnessed 30 years of holiday celebrations. The afternoon sun streamed through the bay windows, casting long shadows across the carefully arranged place settings and the centerpiece Mom had spent hours perfecting. I sat in my usual spot near the kitchen door, picking at my mashed potatoes while Dad held court from the head of the table. At 58, he still commanded the room with the same authority that had made him one of the city's most successful cardiologists. His voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing news to patients and families. "Maria's doing exceptionally well at her pediatric practice," Dad said, gesturing toward my older sister with obvious pride. 300 patients, 2 associate doctors, expanding into a second location next year. She's following the family tradition of excellent medical practice. Maria smiled graciously from her position of honor at Dad's right hand, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite spending the morning helping Mom in the kitchen. "Thank you, Dad. The practice has been very rewarding. We're seeing children from 3 school districts now. And Carlos," Dad continued, turning to my younger brother, "just made partner at his law firm. Youngest partner in the firm's history, following in his uncle Roberto's footsteps in building a prestigious legal career." Carlos raised his wine glass modestly, his law school ring catching the afternoon light. "I've been fortunate to work with excellent mentors. The corporate litigation department has grown significantly this year. Success runs in this family," Dad said, looking around the table with satisfaction at the assembled doctors, lawyers, and business owners. "The Rivera children have always understood the importance of achievement and professional excellence. We don't accept mediocrity." I kept eating quietly, cutting small pieces of turkey and focusing on the cranberry sauce Mom had made from scratch. I knew where this annual Thanksgiving lecture was headed, could feel the familiar tension building as Dad prepared to address the elephant in the room. "Of course," Dad said, his tone shifting like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. "Not everyone has lived up to their potential." The table fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even my young nephews stopped their whispered discussion about video games and turned their attention to the adult drama unfolding. "Isabella," Dad said, looking directly at me with the same expression he probably used when delivering difficult diagnoses to patients, 36 years old, and still playing around with laboratory experiments like a graduate student who refuses to grow up. I took a sip of water and said nothing. Experience had taught me that engaging with Dad's disappointment speeches only made them longer and more painful. Better to let him finish his annual assessment of my failures. "Maria was chief resident by 36, he continued, his voice carrying across the dining room to reach every family member present. Carlos had already made senior associate at his firm. They understood that education is supposed to lead to real careers, not extended adolescence in academic research facilities." My cousin Roberto, always the peacemaker, tried to redirect the conversation. "Dad, Isabella has a PhD in molecular biology from Stanford. That's hardly a failure." "A PhD that she's never used for anything practical," Dad replied, dismissing Roberto's defense with a wave of his hand. "She's been doing research at various universities for 12 years. No private practice, no corporate position, no real income to speak of. No contribution to the family's medical legacy." The familiar shame washed over me as I looked around the table. Everyone was successful in ways that were easy to measure and understand. Maria's thriving pediatric practice with its steady stream of grateful parents, Carlos's law partnership with its impressive salary and social status, our cousins' businesses and professional achievements that could be explained at dinner parties. "You know what I told my colleague Dr. Martinez last week?" Dad continued, apparently not finished with his annual evaluation of my life choices. "He asked about my children's careers, and I had to explain that my youngest daughter is still finding herself in academic laboratories at 36 years old." Mom looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her husband. She'd learned over 40 years of marriage that challenging Dad's pronouncements publicly only made family gatherings more uncomfortable for everyone. "You're the biggest disappointment in this family," Dad announced, his voice rising with the kind of authority that had commanded respect in hospital corridors for 3 decades. "You had every advantage. Excellent education, family support, connections in the medical field through my practice. And you've wasted all of it on academic daydreaming. Everyone stayed silent. The only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sound of football on the television in Dad's study. Maria and Carlos kept their eyes on their plates, uncomfortable witnesses to this annual ritual of disappointment. 12 years of playing scientist, Dad continued, building momentum like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. While your siblings built real careers that contribute to society and support families. Maria heals children and runs a successful business. Carlos helps people with serious legal problems and earns a partner's salary. You grow bacteria in petri dishes and write papers that 5 people read. My phone buzzed on the table beside my water glass. The caller ID showed, Harvard Medical School. I glanced at it and let it ring, not wanting to give Dad additional ammunition about my inability to maintain professional boundaries. See. Dad pointed at my phone as if it proved his point. She can't even afford to keep it on silent mode. Probably some university administrator calling about unpaid lab fees or telling her that her grant funding has been cut. A few nervous chuckles rippled around the table. My Aunt Patricia smiled sympathetically, the same expression she'd perfected as a nurse before marrying into the family. My phone buzzed again. Same number. This was unusual. Harvard Medical School didn't typically call repeatedly unless something urgent was happening. Isabella, Mom said softly, her voice barely audible above the tension in the room. Maybe take that outside? We're trying to have a family dinner. It's probably her research supervisor, Dad said with theatrical disappointment, calling to tell her that her latest experiment failed and they're cutting her grant money. Another setback in her endless academic career. Or maybe they need someone to clean the lab equipment, Carlos added with a smile that was meant to be supportive but came across as patronizing. The phone buzzed a third time. Harvard Medical School again. My curiosity overcame my caution about giving Dad additional material for his disappointment lecture. You know what? I said, reaching for the phone. Let me just take this quickly. Perfect, Dad said, gesturing grandly to the assembled family. Let's all hear about Isabella's latest academic setback. Maybe they're offering her a position cleaning test tubes at minimum wage. More laughter around the table, though most family members looked uncomfortable with Dad's increasing sarcasm. I answered the call and put it on speaker since everyone seemed interested in my professional failures. Dr. Rivera speaking. Dr. Rivera. An excited voice filled the dining room, cutting through the family tension like a knife. This is Dr. Patricia Chin, Dean of Harvard Medical School. I apologize for calling during the holiday, but I have absolutely extraordinary news that couldn't wait. The entire table went quiet. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, a piece of turkey suspended in midair. The silence was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. What can I do for you, Dr. Chin? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as if receiving calls from Harvard Medical School deans was routine. Dr. Rivera, I'm calling to inform you that the Nobel Committee has requested a formal interview regarding your groundbreaking research on targeted cancer immunotherapy. Your revolutionary work on personalized T-cell modifications has been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Dad's wine glass slipped from his hand, spilling Cabernet Sauvignon across Mom's white tablecloth. The red wine spread like blood across the linen, but nobody moved to clean it up. Everyone was staring at my phone as if it might be playing some elaborate practical joke. The Nobel Committee? I said, my voice barely steady as the magnitude of Dr. Chen's words hit me. Dr. Rivera, your research has revolutionized cancer treatment in ways the medical community hasn't seen since the development of chemotherapy. The clinical trials you've been leading have achieved unprecedented success rates in treating previously terminal cancers. Children who were given weeks to live are now in complete remission thanks to your T-cell modification protocols. Maria was staring at me with her mouth slightly open, her pediatrician's training allowing her to immediately grasp the implications of what she was hearing. Carlos had set down his fork and was leaning forward, straining to catch every word. Dr. Chin, when does the Nobel Committee want to schedule the interview? I asked, trying to maintain professional composure while my entire family listened to every word. Next week if possible. Dr. Rivera, I need you to understand the magnitude of this recognition. In the past 50 years, fewer than 20 researchers have been nominated for Nobel Prizes based on cancer immunotherapy work. Your research represents a fundamental shift in how we approach cancer treatment. I understand the significance of the nomination. Dr. Rivera, your research hasn't just advanced scientific knowledge. It's literally saving lives every day. Children with acute lymphoblastic leukemia who had no hope 6 months ago are now playing soccer and attending school because of your T-cell modification protocols. Families who were planning funerals are now planning graduations. Roberto was frantically Googling something on his phone, his fingers shaking as he typed my name into the search bar. The press conference announcing your Nobel nomination is scheduled for Monday morning at 10 a.m., Dr. Chen continued. Harvard Medical School is honored to host the announcement, given your primary affiliation with our research program and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. I'll be there, Dr. Chen. Outstanding. And Dr. Rivera? The entire international medical research community is talking about your work. You've changed the future of cancer treatment. The modification techniques you've developed are being implemented in hospitals across 37 countries. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I'll see you Monday morning. Dr. Rivera, one final thing. The Nobel Committee specifically mentioned that your research represents the kind of breakthrough that happens perhaps once in a generation. Congratulations on work that will be remembered for centuries. I ended the call and placed my phone back on the table. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. The red wine stain continued to spread across the tablecloth, creating abstract patterns that nobody noticed. Finally, Roberto found his voice. Isabella, you've been nominated for a Nobel Prize? It appears so. For cancer research? Maria asked, her voice weak with shock. Targeted immunotherapy, I said, trying to explain complex science to a room full of stunned family members. We've developed methods for modifying patients' own immune cells to recognize and attack specific cancer cells. Instead of using chemotherapy that kills healthy cells along with cancerous ones, we reprogram the patient's T cells to become precise cancer-fighting weapons. Carlos was reading over Roberto's shoulder as he scrolled through search results. Isabella, there are dozens of articles about you. Dr. Isabella Rivera's revolutionary cancer treatment shows 94% success rate in clinical trials treating terminal pediatric leukemia. The clinical trials have been very promising, I confirmed, understating what had become the most successful cancer treatment protocol in medical history. Dad was staring at me like I was a complete stranger who had somehow appeared in his daughter's chair. Isabella, you're conducting clinical trials for cancer treatments? For the past 4 years. We've treated over 300 patients with various terminal cancers, mostly children but also adults with aggressive forms of leukemia, lymphoma, and other blood cancers. The success rates have exceeded our most optimistic projections. Mom was crying quietly, tears streaming down her face as she realized what she'd been hearing. Isabella, you never told us you were working on cancer cures. I tried to tell you about my immunotherapy research, I said gently. Every time I mentioned T-cell modifications or clinical trials, someone said I was playing with test tubes or wasting time on theoretical nonsense that would never help real people. The memory of years of dismissal hung over the table like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. But Isabella, Dad said, his voice barely audible, if you're nominated for a Nobel Prize, that means. It means her research is being recognized as potentially the most important medical breakthrough of our generation. Maria said, reading from Roberto's phone with growing amazement. Maybe of the past 50 years. Isabella, Carlos said quietly, his lawyer's training helping him process information quickly. This article says you're the lead researcher at the Harvard-MIT Cancer Immunotherapy Consortium. I direct the research program, yes. We have laboratories at Harvard Medical School, MIT, and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. About 200 researchers working on various aspects of immunotherapy development. And you've published over 40 peer-reviewed papers on cancer immunotherapy? 47 as of last month. The latest was in the New England Journal of Medicine, documenting our success with pediatric acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Roberto was reading more search results aloud, his voice filled with increasing awe. Dr. Isabella Rivera, 36, has emerged as one of the world's leading experts on personalized cancer immunotherapy. Her research team has developed treatment protocols that have achieved unprecedented success rates in treating previously incurable cancers, offering hope to families who had exhausted all traditional treatment options. But Isabella, Dad said, struggling to process information that contradicted 12 years of assumptions, we thought you were just doing basic research in university labs. I conduct advanced clinical research at some of the most prestigious medical institutions in the world, I said. The playing with test tubes you've been dismissing is actually developing treatments that save people's lives. We've moved far beyond basic research. We're treating actual patients and seeing them recover from cancers that would have killed them 6 months ago. How many lives? Mom asked through her tears, her voice barely a whisper. The patients in our clinical trials represent about 300 families who were told their loved ones had weeks or months to live. Most of those patients are now in complete remission. We've had 94% success rates with pediatric leukemia, 87% with adult lymphoma, and 72% success with aggressive solid tumors. The table was completely silent as everyone processed the magnitude of what they were hearing. Isabella, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion as her medical training helped her understand exactly what those numbers meant. I'm a pediatrician. Do you have any idea how many children I see with terminal cancers? How many families I've had to give devastating news to? Our pediatric trials have been particularly successful. Childhood leukemia response rates have been over 90%. We're literally taking children who are dying and giving them their whole lives back. You're saving children's lives, Maria whispered, tears starting in her eyes as she thought about all the families who had sat in her office receiving terminal diagnoses. We're developing treatments that give families hope when they previously had none, I said. When a 5-year-old with acute lymphoblastic leukemia doesn't respond to chemotherapy, we can now reprogram her immune system to fight the cancer more effectively than any drug ever developed. Dad finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and uncertain. Isabella, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you explain what you were actually working on? I looked around the table at 14 family members who had spent years dismissing my work as academic frivolity while I was literally developing cures for childhood cancer. Because every time I tried to discuss immunotherapy research, someone changed the subject to real careers or practical applications, I said. When I mentioned clinical trials, you said I should focus on seeing actual patients instead of theoretical research. When I tried to explain T-cell modification, Dad said I was wasting my education on laboratory games. But we didn't understand, Roberto said, his voice filled with regret. You didn't try to understand, I replied gently. You assumed that because my work didn't look like traditional medical practice, it must be less valuable than seeing patients in an office setting. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it. Dr. Rivera, CNN, NBC, and BBC want to interview you about the Nobel nomination. The New York Times is requesting a feature story. Please call when convenient. Isabella, Dad said, standing up slowly like a man who had aged years in the space of minutes. I owe you the most profound apology of my life. Dad, you don't owe me anything. Yes, I do, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I've spent years telling you that you were a disappointment while you were actually saving lives and advancing medical science in ways I never dreamed possible. While potentially winning the Nobel Prize for Cancer Research, Carlos added, still processing the magnitude of what he'd learned about his sister's work. I don't know if I'll win, I said honestly. The competition is extraordinary and there are many deserving researchers. But the research has been successful beyond what we initially hoped when we started the clinical trials. Isabella, Maria said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy? With your work, your research, the path you've chosen? I thought about the question while looking around the table at my family, all successful people who had worked hard to build meaningful careers in their own ways. Maria, I wake up every morning knowing that the research we're doing today might help a family receive good news instead of a terminal diagnosis, I said. When a child goes into remission after our treatment, when parents get to watch their daughter graduate from high school instead of planning her funeral, when we can tell a family that their loved one has a future instead of weeks, that's the most fulfilling work I can imagine. That sounds like happiness, Mom said, wiping tears from her eyes. It is. The recognition is gratifying, but the real satisfaction comes from knowing that families have more time together because of our research. Every day we delay in developing better treatments means more people die from cancers we might be able to cure. Dad sat back down and reached for my hand across the wine-stained tablecloth. Isabella, I'm proud of you. Not because you might win a Nobel Prize, but because you've dedicated your life to helping people in the most fundamental way possible. Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. Can you forgive an old man for not understanding the importance of what you were building? There's nothing to forgive. You wanted to see me succeed, and success looks different in research than it does in traditional practice. You measure success by patients treated and income earned. I measure it by survival rates and families who get to stay together. The conversation continued for another 3 hours as my family asked genuine questions about cancer immunotherapy, clinical trials, and medical research. For the first time in 12 years, they were interested in understanding my work rather than dismissing it as academic waste of time. Isabella, Dad said as we cleared the dinner dishes together, I have one more question. What's that? The Nobel Committee interview. When will we know the results? Nobel Prizes are announced in October. The interview is just part of their evaluation process. They'll interview all the nominees and review all our published research before making their decision. And if you win? I thought about the patients in our clinical trials, the families who had received hope instead of despair, the children who would grow up because our research had given them a future. If I win, it means the medical community recognizes that personalized immunotherapy can fundamentally change how we treat cancer, I said. More importantly, it means more funding for research, more clinical trials, and more opportunities to help families facing terminal diagnoses. And personally? Mom asked. What would winning the Nobel Prize mean to you personally? It would mean that 12 years of work that people dismissed as playing scientist was actually building something that matters, I said. But honestly, the real victory happens every time a patient goes into remission. The Nobel Prize would be recognition, but saving lives is the actual work. 6 months later, I did win the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, sharing the award with 2 other researchers who had contributed to advances in cancer immunotherapy. The ceremony in Stockholm was attended by my entire family, including Dad, who told everyone he met that his daughter was saving children's lives through medical research. But the most meaningful moment wasn't the ceremony or the medal. It was 3 weeks after the Nobel announcement, when I received a letter from the parents of Emma Rodriguez, a 7-year-old who had been in our clinical trial 2 years earlier. Dr. Rivera, the letter read, Emma just started 2nd grade. She's playing soccer, learning to read chapter books, and driving us crazy with questions about everything. 2 years ago you gave us hope when we had none. Today you gave us our daughter's whole life. We can never thank you enough, but we wanted you to know that somewhere in Texas, a little girl is growing up because of your work. You didn't just save her life, you gave our whole family a future. At the Nobel banquet, as I sat at the head table wearing the medal that represented not just my research but the hope we'd given to hundreds of families, I thought about that Thanksgiving dinner when Dad had called me the family's biggest disappointment. Sometimes the most important work happens in laboratories where families can't see it, in clinical trials that take years to complete, in research that doesn't look like traditional success until the day it changes everything. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and committed enough, the world eventually recognizes that what looked like playing with test tubes was actually playing with the difference between life and death. But the real recognition doesn't come from Nobel committees or newspaper headlines. It comes from 7-year-olds learning to read chapter books, from families planning graduations instead of funerals, from children who get to grow up because someone believed that the most important work often happens where people can't see it yet.